It is not every day that a sitting president with sweeping powers can be challenged for actions taken, and the challengers have their way unless it is through a court order. Now, in 2009, the then Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission Advisory Board, with the help of Parliament, forced a presidential appointee to throw in the towel when he ran out of options. So was the appointing authority. However, some of those who stood in the way of powers that be and spearheaded the resistance would later pay for their sins. Call it the price of fidelity to the rule of law. My name is Duncan Haemba. This is KTN News. In September 2009, Kenyans witnessed a dramatic battle of wits. It was a case of a legal and political battle that saw presidential powers tested to the limit, and at the end of the day, a 12-member team forced the president to eat a humble pie and rescind his decision. It was a case of the Kenya Anti-Corruption Advisory Board versus the executive, while Parliament was an interested party. 3 individuals were at the center of all this. Senior Counsel Kongo Mogeni, who chaired the advisory board of the now defunct Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission, KACC, Justice Aaron Ringera, who was the director at the KACC, then the president, Mwai Kibaki. A 5-year tenure of Aaron Ringera as the director at the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission was coming to an end on 8 September 2009. The advisory board had a duty to set in motion a process of appointing a new director. Senior Counsel and now Nyamira Senator Okongo Eric Omogeni was the chair of the advisory board, who had replaced Senior Counsel Ahmed Nasir Abdullahi, who had quit the position after falling out with President Mwai Kibaki, whom Ahmed Nasir had accused of flouting the law by declining to appoint Dr. Julius Rotich, the Director for Finance.
When I was appointed to the board on 28th of July 2006, I found that Justice Ringera was already serving his tenure, 5-year tenure from 2004 that was meant to end in 2009. But in between, the contract of one of the assistant directors who was appointed with the same terms like Ringera, that is Mutonyi, came to an end. And we sat as a board and we agreed that the best way to ensure that there is transparency and fairness is to advertise his position, but he be given a chance to reapply if he wanted. And we came up with an evaluation matrix to assess performance and all this. So we advertised his position, and Mutonyi reapplied. He competed with other candidates, and he emerged the best candidate, and we had him reappointed.
John Mutonyi's position was well handled in that no controversy arose within the KACC itself or from other stakeholders from outside. Then came the moment for a heavyweight. The director Aaron Ringera's 5-year term was coming to an end. That is where the legal and political battles began.
Now, when it came to the end of Ringera's tenure, some intrigues started playing out about 3 months to the end of his tenure. We had about 7 members whose term was coming to an end, including the then chair, the late Allen Ngugi, and Justice Ringera wrote an opinion to the Attorney General recommending that 2 things should happen. An amendment to the law, 1, to obligate the nominating bodies to write a letter confirming that they have no problem with the serving members being reappointed for another second term of 5 years, which the law had allowed. And then he also said that pending the nomination of new members, the ones who are serving should continue serving in office till the new ones are appointed. Basically, that was to ensure that when issues of discussions of the expiry of his term were to come into play, certain members were, to be in office. But that never happened.
Former Senator for Mandera, Bill Okero, was one of the 12-member board at KACC then and admits power games had kicked in much earlier.
You will remember that much earlier, the president and the then Justice Minister, I think they had made up their mind that Ringera should be reappointed. And so what they did was to delay the entire appointment of the advisory board. So from 2008, I think it took almost a year before they could reconstitute the new board.
Just like in the case of Dr. Julius Rotich earlier on, President Mwai Kibaki had left out the name of Bill Okero as he gazetted other members of the advisory board for political reasons. Kero had been nominated by his colleagues from the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, ISPAC, to represent them on the board. But the president conveniently left out his name as he gazetted the rest. Kero was paying a price for having been a thorn in the flesh of the NARC regime because earlier during Kibaki's first term in office, then as Member of Parliament for Mandera Central, Kero, a KANU Member of Parliament, was Shadow Minister for Finance who kept the NARC regime that had taken over the reins of power on a platform of zero tolerance to corruption, which the former lawmaker says had performed dismally.
We are not abolishing the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission because I think we all agree that there's room for it. But we are not happy with the performance of the director.
During the time that Mr. Ringera has served as director of CASA, has he been successful? The answer to my question was no.
Of all the corruption cases lodged in court since 2003, there have been convictions in 75 cases as at 30th June 2009.
We had now convened a meeting sometime in September where we would now discuss the reappointment. We had made up our minds. It was clear at the time that Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission had failed dismally. The 5 years of Ringera was a disaster. The Anglo-Lucian corruption. People were very highly placed and very close to the president were involved in massive corruption. And he was very cozy with the executive. And so it had affected the image of Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission. And so the Kenyans had lost confidence in that institution. So we wanted to get a new team and a new face. And our position was very clear. And we made it clear. Immediately we came in that we would be looking for a new face.
The mandate of this commission, insofar as law enforcement is concerned, is limited to investigations and making recommendations for prosecution or otherwise.
In August, during a board meeting, the issue of Justice Ringera's contract lapsing, I think that was going to be on 8th of September 2009, came up for discussion at the board meeting. So the board meeting agreed that Justice Ringera should issue a notice for a board meeting that we agreed was to be held on the 2nd of September 2009, so that we agree on advertising of his position, and we also discussed on the person we were going to appoint to be the interim director, pending the reappointment of, pending the interviewing process, the advertisement, interviewing process, approval by Parliament, and then forwarding the name to the President for formal gazettement, because that's the procedure we had in place.
By virtue of his position, Justice Ringera was the secretary of the commission, and as such, he was the one to issue a notice over his position. But as the board was awaiting things to fall in place procedurally, State House struck. On 31st August 2009, President Mwai Kibaki reappointed Justice Aaron Ringera for another 5-year term.
Then on one evening, I received a shock. I think, I think it was on, if I remember well, 31st of August, 2009. It was about, it was around 4 o'clock. I was driving along L/Avenue. Then I received news, 4 o'clock news, that President Kibaki had reappointed Justice Ringera together with the other directors, then Justice Sichale and Justice Moki Wanjala, for a term of 5 years, without any recourse to the board, without any parliamentary approval. And at first, I thought maybe this was fake news. So I picked my phone and I called Justice Ringera saying, I've had some news to the effect that the president has reappointed you for a further 5 years. And he told me, yes, Chairman, I've been reappointed. I'm in my office. I'm actually enjoying a cup of tea in celebration. So I was taken aback. I was like, how can this happen? Because we are a body that is supposed to push for ethical standards, transparency, and giving equal chances to all Kenyans. That's what we were put in office to do, to fight bodies that were trying to, have skewed processes of appointing people to offices.
The president did what we didn't expect. He decided to reappoint and gazette, or rather gazette the reappointment of Ringera. And in total breach of the law. The law was very clear that the board must advertise and recruit, and then Parliament must approve. And his role was really to gazette. Process has been completed. It was illegal, and so we were not surprised, because we've seen the intrigues from the time our name came in that
On 1st of September 2009, I met the board members. Overwhelmingly, they were all in agreement that the decision that was taken by the president was in bad taste. Because remember, we had issued a board notice calling for a meeting on 2nd of September 2009 to deliberate on the advertisement of Justice Ringera's position. He is the one, as the secretary of the board, who issued that notice to the members. We had discussed in the board and agreed on that, on the way forward, which was that we advertise his position. Now, how would we have sat in the board to work with somebody who was going contrary to the position of the advisory board and on clear provisions of the law that had put us into office and that also put him in office? So my take was that we needed to set an example to the country, that as a body that is tasked with fighting corruption and unethical practices, despite the consequences, we should not rubber stamp a decision of a president who was acting contrary to the clear provisions of the law.
That is when a David versus Goliath battle literally began. It was KACC Advisory Board challenging a commander-in-chief openly on what the chairman and his board believed was a question of fidelity to the law.
So I felt very uncomfortable to, agree with the president on that position he had taken, because as a lawyer, I was convinced that that process was illegal and unconstitutional, and that the president did not have any powers under the law to reappoint Justice Ringera. So I took it upon myself to, bounce this off my other 11 board members. And I called them and I told them, have you heard the news? This is what has happened. And we agreed that we should meet. I told them I'm calling for an extraordinary board meeting on the 1st of September 2009 to deliberate on that move. So come the following day, we we all agreed to meet at the headquarters of KACC, that's at Integrity Center. And when we went there was a lot of hostility. I think one round that we were not in support of that reappointment.
In light of the prevailing circumstances, the advisory board prepared a tough statement and released to the media for dissemination to the public.
So we issued a one-page tacit press release and denounced the action that had been taken by the president. And we told the president that we respect you as the president of this country, but unfortunately, Mr. President, what you have done is illegal, and it will not have the support of the Kenya Anti-Corruption Advisory Board. And we released that press release.
The director was to leave the office on 8th September 2009. Amid the standoff between State House and the Integrity Center, the board turned to Parliament for help. Amos Wako was the Attorney General, government's legal advisor who had laughed off Parliament's opinion over the matter. Gitobu Imanyara was a member of Parliament and was among members of Parliament who opposed President Kibaki's move.
By that time, Parliament, there was a Committee of Justice and Legal Affairs in the National Assembly that was chaired by Abdi Kadir. He was the chair then. I had written to them and reminded them that what the law stated, that we were to make recommendation on the appointment of Director for Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission to Parliament. Parliament was to sit, vet the candidate, and then forward the candidate, if he gets the parliamentary approval, to the president for reappointment. And I told them that this process had not been followed, and we are not going to recognize the reappointment of Justice Ringera.
His term has ended. We've refused to renew it we have annulled the decision to renew it. So he has no basis to lodge any complaint. So we will still have, as a parliament, the power to bring a substantive motion in the House to discuss the conduct of not only him, but the Judicial Service Commission, to send him back to a judiciary under circumstances under which he had lost the confidence of the people.
The resolution of Parliament, okay, that's the opinion of Parliament, but the binding opinion is from the court. Now, that's a law.
The 10th Parliament stood its ground, challenging President Kibaki, and had threatened to withhold payment of Ringera's salary and his 2 assistant directors if they remained in office through an appropriations bill.
An amendment has been introduced to the appropriations bill to remove the vote items relating to salary of the director and the assistant directors. If he wishes, you can ask for free or call a Kamukunji in Uhuru Park where we can raise money to help him.
I think Parliament, in my view, was very, very critical in this matter, because they annulled the gazettement of the reappointment of Ringera and threatened to withhold funding to the commission. So and of course, when you have the Parliament behind you, then you get encouraged to fight on. So the board had that encouragement from Parliament.
The climax of Ringera's reappointment drama was on 8th September 2009. The board had convened another media briefing, which was nearly scuttled.
So when we met on 8th of September, I just, called the media. There were a number of them in the boardroom, and all the board members were there. We had prepared, a press release, which was a very small press release, 1 page, and all of us had sat. The cameras had been set, and I had also occupied my seat as the chair, ready to read the press release. When my secretary then brought a note and said, here is a note for you, it's urgent. So when I opened the note, it was saying there is an urgent call. Receive it before you read your press statement. So I excused myself and told the media people and my board members that I'm attending to a small issue, but I'm coming to read the press release.
The board's chair was just about to read his well-spaced 13-line statement when his secretary quickly rushed into the boardroom, asking him to attend to an urgent call before addressing the media.
So when I retreated to my office, a voice told me that we are calling from State House, and the president has seen a copy of the press release that you want to read to the media. You have persisted in challenging a decision that has been made by the President of the Republic of Kenya, who is a commander-in-chief of the armed forces. They said this is unprecedented, it has never happened, and that if I go ahead, I will be arrested and be charged with subversion, and that I should call off that press release and allow Justice Rengera to assume his office in line with the Gazette notice that had been signed by the then President Mwai Kibaki. To be honest, that was a bit scary. You know, that was a bit scary, and I thought what to do. I thought about the image on my person as somebody who was not just chair of Kenyan Corruption Advisory Board, but I was also at that time serving as the chair or president of the Law Society of Kenya. I also looked at the impunity, that would take root if I was to give in to a decision that the president had taken, but which was contrary to the clear provisions of the law. So I quickly thought that if I shared the message that had been passed to me by the caller who were alleged to be calling from State House to my other members of the advisory board, they will chicken out and I'll be left alone. So I called my wife and shared what had happened, and I said, if something happens, I'm not a thief. I'm merely defending the Constitution of the Republic. I'm advancing the rule of law, and I'm acting in the best interest of the people of Kenya. So I went back to the board meeting, fairly shaken, but read the statement nevertheless, and said that the contract of Rengera was expiring that afternoon, and that the advisory board would not give him a new letter of appointment, and that we would not set his terms of service, and that we will advise finance not to process any payments in form of salary.
Nearly all forces had ganged up to block Justice Aaron Rengera from being reappointed for a second term, a besieged man who was equally determined to fight on and not to disappoint his appointing authority.
The director liveth between the hammer of his friends and the anvil of his opponents. Our work is limited to investigating and forwarding files to him with recommendations, which he may or may not accept.
Events that followed in that week of September were both dramatic and tense. Few individuals banking on the rule of law had literally held the president and his preferred appointee hostage.
Honestly, I was expecting the worst, because a number of powerful forces were not happy with the position that was taken by the advisory board. There were a number of people within the system then who wanted the status quo. to be maintained. And I knew that it was not going to be easy for me. And I knew that I was going to be in bad books with the government of the day. But I said I would live with the consequences. I was ready to live with any consequences, including any threatened arrest, any steps maybe to have me removed from office. I was ready for the consequences.
The issue is there was clearly an attempt to try and protect those very close to the president. And this was coming from the president and the cabinet members trying to protect, their team, and it's about. So I think then Ringera, as the director of anti-corruption, therefore, and a person close to this team, was not in a position to take action. He may have taken action on other small, whatever, and that has been always the issue. He kept saying that I'm going to deal with the big fishes, but the perception, and the reality was that almost all the cases that ended up in court were small fish, and that's not what the Kenyans really expected. It's one thing for cabinet ministers to step aside, but it's another when Kenyans expect the same minister to be charged in court and convicted, and that's what was not coming. And so in my view, really, the issue was executive.
Despite a spirited fight and presidential shielding, an already besieged KSCC director eventually succumbed to pressure, throwing in the towel together with his two assistant directors, Fatuma Sichale and Smokin Wanjala.
And I have today tendered our resignations to His Excellency the President.
A statement that in itself ended a stalemate between the presidency and the KACC advisory board that was backed by Parliament. A statement that saw Ringera speak biblically as he exited.
As the Holy Book, and in particular the Ecclesiastes of Solomon, say, there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. The time for the director of CAS and his deputy to exit the stage of the anti-corruption struggle has come.
The learned friend left the Integrity Center still standing his ground.
Had I not been convinced about the legality of my reappointment, I would never have taken it up.
Blaming his departure on a cabal of individuals, he said he had stepped on their toes in his quest to slay the dragon of graft, given that in mid-August that year he had tabled a list of shame in Parliament.
Look at the list we tabled in Parliament the other day of people under investigation, or people who have been recommended for prosecution, or people against whom suits for recovery of illegally and corruptly obtained wealth have been filed. And ask yourself whether there is validity in that statement and answer it yourself.
Among other things that contributed to Ringera's bowing out was a narrative that was coined and peddled among Kenyans that the under siege director was demanding a whopping 150 million shillings before he steps down, basically painting him as an enemy to Kenyans, a matter that annoyed Ringera.
I've heard people say that he's contemplating suing for, 150 million, but on what basis? His term has ended. We've refused to renew it, we have annulled the decision to renew it, so he has no basis to lodge any complaint.
I have not asked for 150 million from anybody before I can exit. And nobody has made an offer. And if such an offer were made, I would reject it.
Another school of thought believes the executive did not exhibit intentions to fight graft.
Those are the days when members of parliament were also, cabinet was being appointed from members of parliament. Some of the the ministers, as usual, were very, very supportive of the president's action. Mutura was the Minister for Justice, you know, coming out very strongly, and several of his other colleagues. But I think the two committees of Parliament, the one on delegated legislation and the one for legal affairs led by Abdikader, I think, those committee members were the ones who really came out very strongly, if I remember. Yeah.
Prior to the 2009 Ringera reappointment drama, as the chair of the Law Society of Kenya, Omogeni had poked the president in the eye during the controversial 2007 presidential election.
I was called upon as the chair to craft a statement which was to reflect on the position of the Law Society of Kenya. So the most important paragraph of that statement was that we made a conclusion that President Kibaki was not validly elected as a president during the 2007 elections, and that he did not have the legitimacy to take oath and serve as the second president, to serve his second term as the president of the Republic of Kenya. So we called upon the president then, Kibaki, to resign, and then we called upon the Electoral Commission then, which was headed by Kivuitu, to call for fresh elections so that we could have a rerun between President Kibaki and the candidate who was number 2, Raila Amolo Odinga.
A statement that was disowned by a section of members within LSK, among those who had supported Kibaki's re-election bid.
Oh, my friend, the reaction was vicious. The reaction was vicious. I received a call from the then Minister for Justice, Martha Karua, asking me whether the position I'd taken was the position of the members of Law Society, in which she was also a member, and she had not consulted her. She said there are a number of members of Law Society who had voted for President Kibaki. Was I not going against their right by issuing that statement? She reminded me that the then chair of IBC, Samuel Kivuitu, was himself a renowned lawyer, and is the one who had issued a certificate to the president announcing that he had been validly re-elected for a second term. She also told me that as a lawyer, I know that I have no capacity to arrive at a conclusion that a president was not validly elected. That is a precept of our courts. She was furious. And then a number of members, interestingly, one group was led by PLO Lumumba. They wrote to me requisitioning that I call for a special annual general meeting of the Law Society of Kenya members so that the members can deliberate on this very far-reaching decision that the Law Society had taken. And the requisition had been signed by a number of lawyers, led by PLO Lumumba. My own friends, from the Kikuyu community, some who had actually supported my election as the chair of Law Society of Kenya, wrote to me. I received over 100 letters from the supporters of Kibaki, protesting that statement was in bad taste. A company secretary of one of the banks I was acting for, a very supportive client, called me and reminded me that she is a supporter of President Mwai Kibaki, and that by releasing that statement without consulting her, I was really trying to trample on our constitutional rights of electing a president. And let me tell you, Duncan, within a week, I had been removed from the panel of that bank. And to date, I've never received any file from that particular client. So any decision you make in life, there are consequences.
It was not just a thought. It's that the council had not met and there wasn't a resolution to that effect. The Council of the Law Society, and I've been a council member, makes statements, through a council resolution, and then the chairman is mandated to go out and give a statement, especially on weighty matters. There are matters where the chairman can give his view on rule of law. It doesn't mean he is gagged because he's also a Kenyan, or she, because it could also be a she, although we've just missed the boat this time. It is possible that a chairman can issue a statement, but on weighty matters, it has to be by resolution of the council. And that's what I was challenging at that time.
Karua says she faulted the then LSK chair purely based on principle.
A person holding a chair of a professional body, they must try to balance, not give their political views as the views of the society, because being Kenyans, they'll also have political leanings, but they must not display them openly.
Then came a time to pay the price of fidelity to the law when the 2010 Constitution was promulgated. The life of the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission and its entire board came to an end by operation of the law in August 2011, paving way for the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. New positions or opportunities were up for grabs, which the former KACC Advisory Board Chair Okongo Omogeni also applied, not knowing that it was the turn for the presidency he had challenged to return the favor.
So when our term came to an end in August 2011, an advert was placed in the newspaper for people to apply for the new position of the chair of the 5-member commission and membership. So I was one of the candidates who applied. And we did interview through a panel that had been picked through representatives of the Office of the President, the Office of the then Prime Minister, Raila Odinga, stakeholders, professional societies of East Africa, Kenya Human Rights Commission, etc. And after the interview process, I was ranked the top candidate. And a recommendation was made to the President to forward my name to Parliament for vetting. But when that name reached OP, the people serving the President then, led by, I think there was somebody who was called Kiara, made it very clear that this person challenged the re-election of President Kibaki in his second term, and there is no way he can be reappointed to be the chair of the new body, which was Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. So he bypassed my name and opted to pick the person who was number 2. That was Mumu Matemu. And you remember that process was very, very controversial on the floor of the House. When Mumu Matemu's name was taken to the floor, members of Parliament questioned and said if Omogeni was the top candidate, and also given the experience he has on issues dealing with anti-corruption, why, as the President, opted to pick the candidate who was number 2. And you remember when the voting was done on the floor, there was a tie. Those who were in favor of Matemu were 49. Those who were in favor of Omogeni were 49. So the statement was made very clear to me that President Kibaki wanted to have a score, to hit back on the stand that had taken around his re-election for his second term in 2007.
When he applied for the position of being a member of the National Land Commission, he was also among the top candidates, but again his name was rejected. A situation he believes until now was purely out of vendetta because of holding the executive to account.
Just to be sure, I tried again when the National Land Commission was being set up. This time I said, let me go for a lower position. I applied to be one of the commissioners when Zozuru was interviewed for the position of chair. And the law required the president to pick 8 commissioners from about names of 15 members. So when the ranking was done from the interview, I was the top 3. I was number 3. And my name was forwarded. But again, the president bypassed my name and declined to appoint me as a commissioner and appointed other people. I think that was the last time I ever tried to seek state appointment. Yeah, I raised up my hands and said bye-bye to public service. Yeah.
And I think that rather than cry persecution, one would ask, had that particular individual shown his political preference? Because if that was the case, then probably President Kibaki would have been right to reject the nomination. It happens everywhere, and you see it everywhere. Yeah, even in the developed countries. Yeah.
I won't be surprised. That is the practice in government. That if you stand very firm on some of these issues, and the people who you stood up to still in office, especially State House, then invariably they would want to take a revenge when the opportunity comes. They've done that quite often. I was very critical when I was in the 9th Parliament of the Kibaki regime as the Shadow Finance Minister, very critical of the government and their policies and so forth. So when this nomination came in February, when I was out of Parliament, they were very clear. But even before this, I remember a professional body, Hawkins and Associates, advertising for the CEO of Capital Markets Authority. And I applied. And I was top on the list. So that body then forwarded the names to the board of directors of CMA. And so 8 of us, when we were interviewed again, I was on top on the board. So when the top 3 names with my name on top were forwarded to the Minister of Finance, what do you expect? They took number 3. They won't. I mean, I knew we had a lot of quarrels with the Minister, Kimunya at the time, on Charterhouse and so many issues really in National Assembly. So I think that's what happens. I mean, if you definitely if you do that, then they would go after you. Yes, that's the routine in our government.
Any decision you make in life, there are consequences, and the people who are aligned to Kibaki looked at me as their worst enemy ever, and you will be surprised that subsequently a decision was quietly made that I will never get a chance to serve in government as long as President Kibaki was the President of the Republic of Kenya.
It's not seen to have a political side, but when you hold a public place, you ought to balance. If you're too much on one side, unless if you're going to resign, drop your membership, then you are expected to balance and serve everybody without preference. And I think that's the problem we have.
This should go to other professionals who may find themselves in the position I was in. It's a very small price to pay. Because, the worst that can happen is for, as long as you have not stolen from anybody, the worst that can happen is some people in deep state to profile you and ensure that you don't serve the state. But the decision you take, ultimately, it serves public good. Because I don't think, even in the current EACC, anybody can take up his position without strictly complying with the process that has been put down in the law. So it's not something that should scare people. It's a small price. It's a small price to pay.
Duncan Hemba for KTN News.